painting with coffee, that is an experience. Coffee is the best smelling medium you can work with in art.
Best smelling medium in all of art.
Hello, you beautiful haunted romantics. Welcome back to the Solmanac. Today, we're going to be doing a fairy, and not just any kind of fairy. We're going to do a coffee fairy. A fairy made using the art of coffee stains. For any of you who've been following Ghost in the Gaslight for the last, 6-7 years, I've been doing an annual challenge of painting with coffee stains, the art of coffee stains, and the subject matter I use are fairies. That's why I do it in the month of February Februfairy. So it's been a lot of fun. I've done all kinds of different challenges. I've done a fairy every single day, several years. I've done a few fairies with bigger paintings, and I've taken old fairy folklore and illustrated them. It's always a lot of fun. And this year I am excited to get them going and bring them to the vlog. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. And one of the things that I like to do when I'm brewing the coffee is I think the most dependable coffee to use is actually instant coffee. The thing with coffee is it looks very dark. Once you put it on the paper, it's this very nice golden look, but it's very light, and it takes a lot to darken it. Wonderful gradation of golds and browns. It's beautiful. So I'm just gonna go into the kitchen real quick, brew some of that instant coffee. It's gonna smell amazing, even the instant coffee. Coffee is the best smelling medium you can work with in art. Now, painting with coffee, that is an experience. I've made a couple videos about it, which you can check out on this channel. Check those videos out. I'm sure you'll enjoy them if you're interested in the possibility of painting with coffee. After that, we're gonna go into creating a fairy with coffee stains. I think it's gonna be pretty exciting. And my head's been kicking around all day. I couldn't wait to get to this. So yeah. Let's put some magic into this 2025. I already feel like the magic is coming, and I can't wait to see what other adventures February brings us. And it begins today. Let's do it. Let's find some fairies. Let's feel the magic. Let's create something beautiful.
Okay, here is the apparatus that I'll be working with. It's very simple. I've got the pan to heat the water. And this is the instant coffee. I've got the spoon, of course, to dish in the coffee to the pan. Now this is what I'm going to ultimately pour it into. I've filled the amount of water that I want to use in there. I'm going to pour it into the pan, so I have pretty much the amount I want. That's going to be kind of important because once this is boiling, then I'm going to pour it in here. But before it goes back in here, I'm going to have loaded this up with the instant coffee. You don't want to put the instant coffee in the pan. What you want to do to get the right amount of thickness is get it in here first and then kind of pour in stages and mix it up with the spoon. And what I will probably do is have one more jar of water that is cut with some of this so that I have kind of levels. And I'll probably just do 2 layers, if not 1 layer. I'm gonna go pretty easy making tonight's fairy. But that's pretty much how it's done. I don't think it really matters per se what kind of coffee that you use because it's instant coffee. And it's not something that you or anybody's going to taste. It's going to be on a piece of paper. Really what you want is just, you want to go as thick as you can, or you want to have the possibility or the luxury of going as thick as possible. So, I mean, you could use Folgers, you could use anything. In this case, I happen to have this one. It's quality stuff. And I don't have any of the cheaper stuff, so I'm using this one. So you guys all get a treat. And yeah, I will now demonstrate. Okay, so I've got the pot here. And I'm just gonna turn it on slightly high flame. Now I'm pouring this in there. It's hardly any. Again, I'm using this very small type of container. So you can change it based on what you're going to use, but I ultimately start with using the amount of water that I want in there. So my water is pretty much boiling, and I'm just going to do this here. I'm going to take about 4 of these heaping spoons here. So that's going to be pretty well saturated there, and that'll give me as dark as I want to go. And then if I want to cut it later with some water in another jar, I've got everything I need. I'm good to go. All right, so now I'm going to take this water and I'm going to pour it in there. So here we go. I want to block the light here. Okay. That is perfect. That's great. And then apologize for the fogging up of the camera there. Oh, there we go. I can tell you this smells amazing. And now I've pretty much got this beautiful darkness here. And now we have the most delicious and best smelling medium in all of art. And yeah, that's looking good. We're going to make some wonderful things this month. Ah, that smells like gold. Can't wait to use this stuff. Let's see what we've got. I'm excited. Are you excited? And this paper has just been a joy to discover in different ways with different mediums. I'm also going to take a bit of this time to just revel in February. I can't believe we're in 2025. I started doing this challenge in, I think, 2019. So I believe this is the 6th year, I think. And it has gone through a lot of evolutions. It was always fairies and coffee. So I was taking the theme of fairies or the fairy world or fairy folklore and using that as the content, the reason for painting with coffee. I would say they're pretty much unrelated otherwise. And as far as what possessed me to start painting with coffee, it was I was experimenting with a lot of different mediums throughout my life. And as Ghost in the Gaslight was really kicking into gear, I was very much into the dark and the romantic side. Sometimes at the same time, sometimes differently. I know with Inktober, I get to really go into that Halloween dark stuff. And then with Mermaid, I get to go a little more romantic. And with the Halloween art, it had started with the dipping fountain pen and some ink paintings. But because it was mostly ink, it mostly went black and white. And that was a real key, I think, to my early success in terms of consistently creating again after such a drought that I had. And I think I had done 3 or 4 different Halloween prompts, like, 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 Octobers, Inktobers and Drawloweens. And then in, I believe, 2018, I found Mermaid, and I was just totally into that. And I started doing mermaids, but then I thought, well, why don't, similar to how I used a medium, like I used an art challenge to explore a medium with ink in Inktober and Drawloween, why don't I do another medium with Mermaid? And what I touched on was water. Originally I went with watercolors, and then it went to gouache. And now it's pretty much those two with acrylic. So it's pretty much always water soluble. And I love coffee. And I don't even remember where I heard that you could paint with coffee. But, I remember, actually it wasn't in February that I started painting with it. It was during Mermaid. It was during my first Mermaid, towards the end of the month of May. I remember I was staying with my brother, and I kept thinking of how I could paint with coffee. And then I thought, hey, why don't I do that? And I remember it was just a total mess. It was a disaster. Because I quickly learned why you don't see people painting with coffee very much, or why they don't do anything very impressive, because it's very hard to render anything. It's hard to layer. Coffee it can be very unruly, and it pretty much instantly rehydrates when you touch it, so it's very hard to build definition. Matter of fact, I think the only way is to make several different shades of coffee. But they have to be very minutely different. And you can't really build layers. So you have to kind of know exactly which gradation you're going on. It took me a few years to understand this. And I always combined the painting with drawing, with coffee. So as you see here, I'm doing pencil sketches, and it's kind of detailed. And then I am applying coffee. And then I think it was like the second or third year that I started to figure out, you could call it a shortcut, which is, instead of coffee, using coffee stains. And what I mean by that is, you do little droplets and you let them dry, and that can be kind of painstaking and lengthy. And once that's dry, you take more coffee stains and you do them in the spaces of the previous stains. So you're kind of building this layer of different dots in a way. It's like taking pointillism, where you take a pen with different points and then you lay a whole other layer of pointillism on it. And if you're thinking, boy, that sounds kind of tedious, it is, but I think one of the things that I really enjoy about February year after year is I find another way to add to it. Like I might do little droplets. and then I might do that in one section, and then I'm working on another section. So it's always kind of multitasking. I know a lot of things that sometimes mess me up with it is when I get a little impatient and I try to just get as much drying in the first layer as possible, and then the droplets get too close to each other, and then it just becomes like a big puddle, and it just looks washed out. But I'd done this one mermaid story in my first mermaid, and it was this kind of touching symbolic story, not a literal mermaid story, but it was this man he was an old man on the beach, and he was being held by his wife, and he's just kind of remembering life with her, and it's flashing before his eyes, and how he always called her his mermaid, and it was a touching story. And I remember I was writing it in my head as I was just wrestling with this painting of coffee for the first time. And I'd be trying to layer stuff, but then when it would dry, it would just look washed out, or it would just have this even look, and it wasn't layered. And I was totally at a loss with how to deal with it. And then I finally took my pen and I was like, you know what? Maybe this one is a drawing with coffee. So I had to let go of my initial romantic idea of doing a painting for Mermaid of mermaids with coffee. And it just kind of came together once I added the drawing. And on the one hand, I was like, son of a, I guess I'm just, best with drawing. Why am I even doing this painting thing or whatever? And a few months later, it was February, and I had been kicking around the idea of working with coffee more, and I was like, hey, why don't I do fairies? And I remember I think it was like 5 tiny sketches of fairies. And I look at them now, and the coffee is practically fading from the page. I use such thin layers, because I was basically doing like, well, I'll brew the coffee like I know how to drink, and it just came out so light. But there were some that started to come together, and they had these nice ethereal qualities. And I say all this because experimentation, no matter what you do, will seriously pay off. Just keep doing it. I look at the fairies now, and and the what I'm able to get with coffee, and it's not as big a crutch as like the drawing with the pen was the crutch before. And it just seemed like there was very light touching of coffee in there that either looks like a darker shade of white on the paper or it's just been fading with time. I don't know. I think it's just that it was really thin to begin with. But now I feel like I can really own the page with that golden brown quality. And the next year, I think I still didn't do fairies every month. I think it was like a few more. Or actually, it was. I think 2020 was my first year where I did them every day of the month. And then, yeah, 2021, if I'm not mistaken, was when I really leaned into dark coffee stains. And, there may be some this year that I do that are those kind of dark coffee stains. That's where I really learned how I could get really dark values on them. And that was very exciting, but I was like, wow, that's what it takes to to do dark coffee, huh? And then, along the way around this time, I was really experimenting with how to get my coffee darker, what I would brew. And I went basically with instant coffee as the best one. I haven't really done Turkish coffee. I mean, that's the mud coffee. I think that maybe that could be a good one to do. I absolutely love Turkish coffee. So it would just be great to do that at some point. And I love painting with the sumi brush, especially in my coffee pieces. I like painting with ink with the sumi brush as well, which I think is what it's originally designed for. But the sumi brush holds a lot of paint in it. And then it's also got that amazing point. So you can get like a bit of drawing happening there too, which, at some point I'd like to really mine that. I don't think I've really, exploited the sumi brush for everything it can do, but I'm not necessarily doing much drawing when I'm painting with coffee, as I would with ink. And so you can see right there, I'm going to do this dark staining method here. And I'm going to be touching key points to just get some of the darkness of what hair does, It just has that sheen of light and dark. And of course, one of the rules with when you're making any kind of picture, whether it's photography or painting or drawing, you want to control the eye of the viewer. And I think the best way to do that is to have a focal point that's going to naturally draw the eye. So if you know where that is, you kind of know what to focus on, what not to focus on. So I think the best way to have that focal point, and you'll hear me say it a lot if you haven't already, Ghosts in the Gaslight, I like to study light a lot. I like to do studies of light. I like to play with light and shadow, whether it's with drawing or painting. And the focal point, I mean, there's another name for it. It just escapes me right now. But the point that you want to keep the eye is the point of the picture where light and shadow have the most contrast. So if you're thinking that in here the place is right where the hair meets the neck, that's pretty much what I'm going for. I'm going to play around. There's going to be, all kinds of places we go, but that's kind of like what this piece is about. And it's been a journey with February Februfairy. Last year, I think, was the first time where I really started combining coffee with another medium. I started adding bits of gouache in there because I wanted to go really dark, but I wanted to get that golden beauty of coffee. So I thought, I don't need to be really strict about it. Like, it has to be all coffee, and I really liked how it wound up turning out. It's interesting because, totally unrelated, I found that there were already artists using February for fairy prompts. There's February as well. So the Fae, which are the fairy race in Ireland. And I started getting into that. And it's funny because I thought I had just created my own challenge in Februfairy, but I started to think about mine, and I'd play with the words Feb, brew, fairy, because I brew coffee. And I thought, wow, that is actually kind of perfect there, because it gives me a reason to be doing this. Like I said in the beginning, it was just kind of a random pairing of fairies and coffee. I do remember having a conversation with a guy. He was a kind of a character, but he was very much about money, and he loved what I was doing, and we were just kind of brainstorming what I could do. And I think it was part of what led me to Februfairy. But there was something about, I think originally I was kind of stumped of what to do. I wanted to do coffee mermaids, but I felt like that was going to be copying Starbucks. And as soon as like we kind of got that thought there, it was like, well, that's off the table. And then, I've always been fascinated with fairies. I mean, they're perfectly hand in hand with ghost stories, especially when you get into the old lore of them. They can be just as mystical and spooky and scary. And so then it was kind of just about everything falling into place. And it's been a great evolution. Last year doing gouache and folklore. The year before I did lots of folklore. I found a great springboard when I started learning some of those stories, and then the way they'd find their influence in my Ghost in the Gaslight fairy stories was really fun. There is nothing like starting a project from a place of bliss, having a little faith in it, being consistent, showing up to it constantly, and then it just keeps kind of giving back to you. It just lets you know that you're on the right path, and it's wonderful to see. I mean, year after year, it's just, I'll always kind of notice there's this technique was not last year. That was something I found this time. And it remains to be seen what I do this year, but that's part of the fun. Is I think I mentioned it in the Inktober video, which you should totally check out, by the way. But you're just not the same artist that you were at the beginning of the challenge. So, we'll see when March 2025 comes along how I am with Februfairy. It may be that I don't do anything totally ambitious other than incorporating these vlogs constantly as a means to do Februfairy, it could almost be like February 2020 where I just made sure that I kept doing fairies. I think in 2020 it was basically, that was very challenging because I was basically doing sleeping fairies. And that is a very hard thing to write about over and over and over and over again. I mean, you can only do so much, and I had to do that about 28 times, and I did. Actually, as a matter of fact, I had them all on my wall afterwards. So I'd come in to my room and there'd be all these sleeping coffee fairies. It was really neat. And part of why I did that was because I wanted to do a lot more figure study. And so I wanted to get reclining poses and work on that feeling of relaxation. By the way, you see this white here. That's not coffee, obviously. So I'm adding gouache. I wanted to get a feeling of shine to just make her just pop a little bit. But I am aware of how easy gouache makes things. And I knew that if I kept going, this was just going to turn into a noticeable gouache painting. And I really wanted to keep the overall feeling of a coffee. Because as much as I love mixing the gouache with the coffee, it does do this slightly weird thing where it's kind of doing its gouache-ness. And what I mean by that is gouache is opaque. It's an opaque water soluble. All the colors are mixed with a little bit of white in there. So when the light hits a gouache painting, there's almost like a bright glow to all the colors because the light is picking up all that white paint within the color. And it's never going to look as white as the exposed pieces of white paper. It's going to have almost bluish or silver or grayish quality as it thins out. And I really found that with a couple of my paintings last year. And I got to the point where I was really depending on the gouache to do the definition. And this time I just wanted to make sure I do it just a little bit and stop when I need to. So right there I just put a big bit of white there. Because again, you know, I'm getting the shoulders there, I'm getting this nice shine, and it looks like kind of almost wet, almost humid on the shoulders and the wrists and the kind of the knuckles. But remember, I'm wanting this to be mostly about where the hair meets her neck. I know it's a fairy, and maybe you could say, well, what about the wings? But at the end of the day, I'm telling human stories symbolically. So for me, it's all about where the hair meets the neck and where that pinky finger is kind of has just, you know, accidentally fallen upon her neck there. That makes me feel the most. It's not the wings. Though I can give them, as you can see, I can give them that kind of nice layer. And I remember I was feeling like I want you to feel the joy of painting when you see this. So I want a couple satisfying strokes of white. And because coffee rehydrates, the coffee is going to kind of turn that white to a more of a gold. You can see the first wing, that's already starting to fade. So it's giving these wings a nice kind of ethereal quality to her. But wings are, I don't know, I feel like I'm always starting over when I'm figuring out wings. I don't necessarily have a method where I'm like, nope, that's how it is. That's another interesting thing about Februfairy is the wings are many times very different in how I render them, not in how I shape them. This is usually how I shape. I don't spend too much time like trying to innovate the wings. Februfairy is just another way of taking this amazing reality we're all used to and then just giving it another set of clothes. So I've been kind of playing around with the gouache on here, and I'm going a little more like cocky there because I'm seeing how it tends to fade. And I want just a little more contrast. And I'm also, you saw I brought in the paper towel there to light it up. So I'm giving it just a little hint of assistance from gouache. But it's also watered down. Like I put it on the palette, but then I put it in the water a little bit. And it's going to do an effective layer of opacity, but not too much. The water's gonna dry and then it's gonna get thinner. But it's giving a little sense of a nice, I don't know how else to put it. It's like a painter's war. I like to feel the battles being fought. It's like a balance between grace and messiness. That's what I want to invoke. That there is, for the most part, I'm in control here, but I'm not trying to make it this perfect display of fantasy realism or something. I want you to just feel something, because I was feeling something. So now I'm just kind of playing with her hair, because as I've been finding definition of light as it falls on the skin, I'm like, well, you know what? The hair is going to be important. And if I just leave the hair, it's just going to look like that. So I wanted to just put something else on and play with the way the light hits it. But I wanted it to just be paint. And I'm making sure that neck pops there. I've put a lot of shading on these hands. Yeah, at the end of the day, I want it to be her neck. And, there's this point gouache and coffee rehydrate when you add water. So, all I need to do is just kind of either add water or add some coffee to this gouache. And right now what I'm doing is just thinning out the globs of white so it doesn't look so globby. And now as it dries, it just kind of gives a little more the feeling of the shape of someone's hair and how it bunches up. And I think this is my first signature coffee stain with the current signature I'm doing. I needed a painter signature. because I just felt like all my my Landerman signature was long, and it's great for paint, but I just felt like I wanted to do my initials for paint. So that's just like 3 initials. And then a few months ago, I found, I sat down and made like, I guess, a Solomon Shiv Landerman, SS Landerman logo. You can see the S and then the L and then the S. And sometimes you can see I'm kind of going for a heart shape. But with this one, I'm kind of quickly finding I better be careful, because if you put 2 puddles or droplets of coffee next to each other, they can't wait to mix it up with each other and become one and merge. It's very sexy. So you just have to be mindful of how close they are. So I just keep kind of tempting the fates here, but all in all, it pretty much dried that way. We'll see how it goes. Honestly, when I'm doing pictures like this that are also inked, I could just sign it with pen, because pen makes up a very integral part of the piece. But I wanted to do it with the initial, the monogram or whatever it is. And this is the first fairy of 2025. Exciting. And I just wanted to share the story of Februfairy a little bit with you. And yeah, I'm looking forward to what the next fairy is going to be, when it's going to be. Well, Salam Java, everyone. Enjoy.
And there she is. This is the first fairy of 2025, Februfairy. And I love how she came out. I think one of the little goals with this was to just enjoy painting, the joy of the art of coffee stains. Not getting overly complicated. There's always a time for that, but I don't want to do it every time. I just love this. It just evokes an emotion, and that's all I wanted. But it feels warm because I've got that nice golden romance of coffee. And thank you for accompanying me on this little this little adventure. And I just love the way this is on this paper. I've never really used this paper for watercolor, but I was looking it up because it was a gift to me, and I was actually starting using it last year to reinvent my love for pencil sketches. This is what I did that lion on, for instance. Anyway, I love seeing how the water holds up to it, and also the coffee stains really react well to it. I think much better than any of the paper I've used before. So this is a find, very special moment, this video. I think there's a real value to living your life as though you know that the fairies are everywhere. I think that, like many people, I see the fairy world, whatever you want to call it, as that place between this world and the sweet hereafter, and they get to cross through constantly, and knowing that keeps a sense of wonder. It keeps the inner child alive. That is a very meaningful place to be, I believe. And I think about when Yeats was putting this book together and collecting all this lore. Whenever you do something like that, we have this superpower as human beings to make whatever we focus on become more real. And I'm not sure why that is, but it is. And whatever you set your sights on, it just becomes more and more alive. And that's a great place to be. And to find actual stories from the countryside of people experiencing these beings and this other world really does a lot to kindle inspiration, I believe. And I speak from my own experience. Since my journey began with February, every year it gets a little more real. I think I had an experiment because I noticed how Christmas at this point sparks so much creativity in me throughout my years, and then Halloween as well. And several years ago, I started to marry the excitement, the fun, the imagination of Halloween rituals with artistic themes and drawing. And it was a resounding success that has happened year after year. It just keeps giving back. I've had years where I just think maybe I'm not going to, and then I do it. I just can't not do it. And that has happened with Mermaid, and each year it just seems to get a little deeper in some way. And I would say the same thing is true for Februfairy. Absolutely. For Februfairy and coffee and folklore. This is just so exciting. And I would say, zooming out, the whole Ghost in the Gaslight project has just taken me different places. Selling art online, making original art, selling those, live streaming ghost stories on my Wednesday night ghosties for the Facebook community, and making these YouTube videos, which are among my most favorite and proud creations, I must say, and then also designing products or swag or merchandise. It's all so much fun, and I just keep building off of it. And this is no exception. We will see what the month of February this year brings us, and this is just the beginning. And on that note, I would just like to invite you to join my email list. I will be sending, little extra fun things out. There's also monthly drawing, and you are automatically entered to win things from me. Fun Ghost in the Gaslight stuff. Who doesn't want that? All you have to be is signed up as a member, which is a lot of fun. I'll be sending one out soon, I think. This vlogging, it's very exciting, but it's been a bit of a learning curve of time management, as you can imagine. And then also there is my Substack, which is very exciting because that is where my new long-form stories are. And it has really changed the way my stories work. And I can't wait for the next one, which is almost done to, actually by the time you're watching this, it'll pretty much be out. But I'll have that link in the description. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't. If you enjoy this kind of content, I love hanging out with you guys. Much more to come. I will see you soon. Take care, you beautiful haunted romantics. I'm Saul.